Hi everybody, I'm a glass case of emotion, and welcome to Volume 17 of Japan-only PS1 games, the ongoing series dedicated to shining a spotlight on the PlayStation games that never left Japan. And if you happen to be in possession of any of these games and don't currently live in Japan, you may need to turn yourself into the police right away, as you may in fact be a criminal. As always, we're going to rely on our Lord and Savior, Senior Wheel, to choose 3 Japan-only games suggested by this show's lovely viewers to review. Now what 3 games are we going to look at? Well, you're just going to have to watch to find out, or skip ahead, or just read the video description, but come on. That's a lot of effort. You've already put the video on, you're settled in now, you've just opened a packet of crisps. You're basically committed, so just sit back, relax, and let the wheel provide.
You will provide.
また変なやつが現れたな。ノームの手先に違いない。それにしても姫はどこへ行ってしまわれたのか。困ったもんだ。
First up today, we have the surrealist nightmare that is Yellow Brick Road, which first made it to the PlayStation in August of '96 and was selected for us today by the lovely our game. Now, funnily enough, I do actually own this game on the Saturn at least, mostly because I saw the box art once and thought, man, that's a game I need to own right away, even though the box does state that the game is just for family and for girl, which unfortunately I am neither of. I'm just Sean. Anyway, by now I'm sure you can tell this is one of the many video game adaptations of Frank Baum's 1900 novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, a book that has a lot of adaptations, be it in movie, musical, or a prison TV form. As for video games, the earliest of these adaptations appeared from various American developers on home computers and consoles, the most famous of which is probably the Super Nintendo game, which I've never played, but it sure does look like The Wizard of Oz on the Super Nintendo. But for me, the most interesting of the Wizard of Oz video game adaptations comes from Japanese developers, one of which is a DS role-playing game from Mediavision, the team behind the Wild Arms games, and also more recently the Digimon role-playing games, and is honestly one of the most visually appealing games on the DS in my opinion. Such a cool little game. And speaking of visually appealing, maybe the most bizarre and obscure of all the Wizard of Oz games are a trilogy of games from Japanese developer Synergy Incorporated called Yellow Brick Road, a kind of hybrid of adventure game, role-playing game, and a mini-game collection set in the world of Oz, and it's also kind of insane. Now, of these 3 games, all of them did make it out on Windows and Macintosh computers from 1995 to 1997, but interestingly, the first 2 of these games were also released on the Apple Pippin home console, and I find that interesting because while I know of the Pippin, it's very rare to come across any games for it, so if you've ever wondered what a Pippin game might look like, it's this. But we're not here today to talk about the Pippin, we're talking about the PlayStation, and would you believe it, courtesy of Acclaim Japan, the very first Yellow Brick Road game would see a port to both the PlayStation and Saturn in '96, exclusive to Japan of course, because that's what these videos are about. And I gotta say, this box art, it really is an all-timer for sure. I mean, look at these fellas. What a great bunch of lads. So now that we know a little about Yellow Brick Road, let's check out the first chapter in the trilogy and see what it's all about. Now, seeing as this is a Japan-only release and primarily an adventure game, it's safe to assume we're going to face some language barrier difficulties here. Now, luckily the game itself isn't all that text heavy or menu heavy. In fact, there's very few menus in this game at all. The majority of the navigation and item selection is done via images, which makes gameplay quite manageable for anybody out there. However, the majority of the dialogue in this game is in spoken Japanese without any subtitles, so unless you have a basic understanding of the language, you're going to find it a bit difficult to pick up on the intricacies of the plight of our little Oz buddies, except for the line. He does in fact just sound like a cowardly lion. Now, in spite of these issues, for somebody Japanese challenged like myself, the gameplay and story is still really easy to follow, as it's a very visual game. The main objective is to defeat the wizard in his castle, and you do this by forming a party of 3 heroes, starting with the Tin Man, who you need to find in his house. And he also has rollerblades in this game, which is pretty badass. The Lion, who you find tied to a big boulder and need to free, and finally the Scarecrow, who has been tied up and imprisoned inside the wizard's big castle. Now, meeting these characters and getting them to join your party can be accomplished by moving around Oz in classic adventure game style, using a mouse cursor to point in any direction you want to go. Unfortunately, the game does seem to lack mouse support, but it is easy to control using a PlayStation pad, with options to speed up your cursor by holding the shoulder button. So it's not too bad. Now, at first, I thought I was going to have some trouble navigating around the world and figuring things out, but it is a surprisingly linear game. As it turns out, if you simply follow the yellow brick road, you're going to find what you're looking for. Occasionally, there are items you can click on in the environment that get added to your inventory, but there isn't even an inventory that you can bring up in-game, so you don't really need to worry about it. Soon into the game though, after recruiting the Tin Man and finding the poor cowardly lion, you're going to get introduced to the game's battle system. That's right, we've got real-time RPG style battles, although the system here is kind of unique. There's no health bars, damage numbers, even stats for our characters. Essentially, all your attacks in this game either stun enemies or push them back, and the goal is to push them back far enough so that they simply just walk away, and if the enemies make it to you, well then, you lose. Each character has a basic attack, but also remember those items that we picked up earlier? You can also use these to attack or stun enemies, and as the game goes on, new enemies will appear that have immunity and weaknesses to certain items, and depending on which character is using the items, you can also unleash different attacks too. It's quite simple in execution, but I won't lie, I kind of liked it. You need to figure out the right attacks for each enemy and then make sure that you juggle them correctly between your characters. And also, stronger attacks have longer cooldowns too, so there is some skill involved. And I also do quite like the way these lads just look kind of derpy. I don't know, I just found it fun. Simple, but fun. But here's the thing, everything you've seen thus far, that's kind of the game in a nutshell. You explore the environment, rescue your party members, engage in the odd battle, find a few keys, access some new areas, and then eventually, if you're lucky, engage in a final boss battle with the wizard and his giant ominous head. And while I thought getting there might be difficult thanks to the whole, language barrier thing, surprisingly this entire game can be beaten in around 30 to 40 minutes, features 2 different areas, and has a grand total of 6 different battles. That is the whole video game. I mean, just as I felt I was getting started, the credits rolled and gave me a teaser trailer for the next part of the game, which, to be fair, looks pretty badass, but still, I was very surprised. So yeah, that's Yellow Brick Road, I guess. Is it a good game? I can't really say so. It's a very basic adventure game with some very basic real-time RPG adjacent combat and a very little content, but in saying that, I still kinda liked it. I don't know what it is. I mean, the critic in me, which let's just imagine as a very tiny nostalgic critic that lives in my brain, knows this is bad, but as a lover of whimsy, cool scarecrows giving the peace sign, tin men on rollerblades, and a cowardly lion that just makes this noise a whole bunch, this is just surreal and jank enough to be rather charming. Little things like the character portraits moving way too fast when they talk, the silly attack animations, the enemies just walking away sadly in the feed, all of the visuals really. This is fun stuff. The voice acting also sounds pretty decent to my ears, and some of the sound effects and music can also sound pretty damn good on occasion. But unfortunately, these console ports also seem to have some compromised audio, with a slight hiss being audible on both the PS1 and Saturn ports of this game, which isn't ideal, but even still, it's not enough to detract from some of the more memorable pieces and silly sound effects. So yeah, 40 minutes, 3 party members, 6 battles, and 1 giant wizard head later, you're ready to move on to the second entry in the series, which sadly did not see a console port, except for the Pippin of course, which is a real thing I keep forgetting exists. But from everything I've seen of the game, it really does look to be a much larger and fleshed out version of the first entry with more areas, more party members, more everything really. And in the third entry, things get even more surreal, with the game essentially becoming a trippy minigame collection where the moon kidnaps the scarecrow or something. And I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty cool to me. Seriously, regardless of the quality of these games, if you look at the 3D renders made for these things, the whole thing is quite the vibe. I mean, look at this shit. It's just dudes being dudes. So Synergy Inc.'s Yellow Brick Road trilogy certainly is one of the video game series of all time. Whether you should bother to play it or not, that's a different story. While it's very playable with no Japanese knowledge, it's still something you can't really fully appreciate without understanding all the dialogue. Not that there is a whole lot of it, but it is still a core part of the experience. But at the end of the day, whether you can understand Japanese or not, I have a feeling you already know if this is something that's up your alley. But regardless of your feelings towards it, this is a game I at the very least shan't soon forget. And I think we can all agree that them putting this cover art into the world is a net positive for us all. And for that, I thank them.
もう参ったな、助けてくれよ。万平のやつら全然言うこと聞いてくれないんだから、ノームの手下じゃないって言ってるのに、こんなところに閉じ込めちゃって。
You will provide.
Next up, we got ourselves a spooky game, and not just any spooky game, a spooky fighting game. That's right, it's Mizuki Shigeru no Yokai Butouden, which made it to the PlayStation in April of the year 97. This game was chosen for us today by the lovely Galaxy Express 999. And you know what happens if you flip the number 999 upside down? That's right, you've got 3 upside down 9s. Anyway, this right here is a yokai fighting game. If you don't know what yokai are, they're basically supernatural beings and spirits from Japanese folklore. Sometimes they're scary, sometimes Mario would jump on them, sometimes you can keep them in a watch, and for today's game, we'll be making them battle one another in various exciting ways. Now, oddly enough, this isn't the first yokai game to make it into an episode of this series. If you cast your mind all the way back to Volume 2, assuming you've watched that already, I talked about a game called Gegege no Kitaro from Konami, a really tough but pretty enjoyable 2D platformer released late in the PS1 lifecycle. In fact, the series Gegege no Kitaro was largely responsible for repopularizing yokai in modern Japan, and the author and artist behind Kitaro was none other than Shigeru Mizuki, basically the grandfather of modern yokai, and would you believe it, this game right here has his name literally in the title. So does that make this a Gegege no Kitaro fighting game? No, not really. Basically, this game contains the artwork and designs of Mizuki's yokai, but only the royalty-free ones. So licensed characters like Kitaro, nuh-uh. Creatures from folklore like the Oni, Tengu, and Kappa, yeah, they're all here, and look just like their Gegege no Kitaro form. So it's the real deal, but without the crazy licensing fees needed to add this little boy into it. And as much as I'd like to see him get beaten up by the Grim Reaper, I think we've got all the important characters here. Anyway, that's the backstory. How is the game? Well, it's an early '97 console-exclusive fighting game from a company called KSS, who are mostly known for providing support to anime companies and also dabbled in video games on occasion. So in other words, it's not great. In fact, simply just looking at the gameplay, if you know your fighting games or just the games in general, you can probably tell this isn't the smoothest fighter on the block. We're running at 30 frames per second, which is fine for me personally, but the animations, the frames, a lot of the things here are really very jittery in this game, and unfortunately this is one of the main genres that you really hate to see this in. But Sean, I'm not a hardcore fighting game fan, I just want to make yokai duke it out one-on-one. Can I still have a good time? And to that I would say, yeah, kinda. This certainly isn't a good fighting game, however, it's still kinda fun. So to break it down, we have a 3D engine, but with gameplay played on a 2D plane, so your basic 2.5D fighter. There's 2 modes in total, the arcade mode, and a 2-player versus mode, and that's it. In fact, you can't even save in this game, something you also couldn't do in Yellow Brick Road, oddly enough. Now, once we're into the game, you can choose from 8 different fighters, all of which are spooky, except for everybody's favorite, a nice anime girl. You've got 4 attack buttons, one assigned to weak punch and weak kick, and one assigned to strong punch and strong kick. You get a variety of special moves per character, almost all of which utilizing the standard Street Fighter inputs, which means if you want to shoot a projectile or do a dragon punch, well, you can, but now in yokai form. All in all, it's very standard stuff for the most part, but there are some fun elements here. For example, you can access shortcuts to most of your special moves via the shoulder button, something that wasn't really often seen in earlier fighting games, definitely helpful for beginners or for experts that like to spam moves at an alarming rate. Of course, you can't access every special move or the light or heavy variants of the same move, but it is still a nice feature to have, especially if you're like me and didn't have access to a moves list or manual for this game. Of course, seeing as this is an early fighter, there's no in-game moves list present in this thing. Now, you can figure out a good few of the moves just by trying out the usual inputs, but I did notice during my first arcade run that the AI was using some interesting moves and combos, some of which were capable of killing me very quickly. So I did some searching for a moves list online, and nothing was available in the usual sphere, but luckily if you do check out Japanese sites, you can find a bit more information, and I managed to find 4 pages of the manual, which was very exciting. Now you might ask why I didn't just buy the game and check the manual, and that's because this game is kinda pricey, so 4 pages will do me just fine. So the big moves in this game are a very powerful combo, which you can perform using a set sequence of button inputs, which is actually very similar to that seen in the Tekken series, and while this is definitely jankier than Tekken, it is still as satisfying to pull off successfully. And finally, there is the Danger Special, which is really the game's most interesting feature. Essentially, if your health bar drops below a certain threshold, it starts flashing, and once that happens, you can now use your Danger attack, which does massive damage to your opponent, depleting anywhere from 60 to 80% of your opponent's health bar in one go. And needless to say, that can turn a round on its head pretty quickly, and while this might seem a little bit cheap, I do like the tension that it can add to a fight. So in a nutshell, that's the game's combat. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's certainly enjoyable when you get your head around it. It's just unfortunately janky, kinda basic, and also lacking in content. But even in spite of the jank, I still had more fun playing this than some other fighters on the console, and I think that really boils down to two things. Yokai are pretty cool, and the music here is pretty banging. So let's talk about the yokai and visuals. I love the designs of the yokai, and I think some of the animations and moves are pretty sweet despite the inherent jankiness. It's a shame there's no real end scenes for beating arcade mode, nor can you unlock the two boss characters via regular means, but there is a cheat code that you can input to unlock both of them, so they are at least accessible in-game, which is quite nice. As for the stages, they featured the usual flat background with 3D floor that you'll see in a lot of 2.5D fighters of this era. Sometimes the stages can look pretty nice, but most of the time they don't really stand out, to be honest, which, considering the subject matter, is quite a shame. However, something that certainly did stand out is this game's excellent soundtrack. It really caught me off guard, to be honest. It's not like an all-timer or anything, but the game manages to give us a lot of tracks that not only highlight a lot of very nice traditional Japanese instruments, but at the same time are just really catchy and low-key bangers. Now, not every track is like this, mind you. Some don't have any traditional Japanese influence and are just bangers for the sake of being bangers. But if there's one thing I take away from my experience with this game, it would be the soundtrack for sure. Lots of really good stuff here.
1本目用意始め
So yeah, that was Mizuki Shigeru no Yokai Butouden, a janky, oddly endearing little fighting game that's low on content, but you can tell it's doing its best. I can describe this game in a very particular sense. I mean, I know a lot of you out there, right, have probably played a game that you know is not good, but even still, you kinda like it anyway. This is one of those games. I mean, I've played more competent games, but actively dislike the gameplay, while this here is kind of fun in spite of itself. It's not going to be showing up at EVO anytime soon, but if you like your fighting games with an extra layer of jank and no balance whatsoever, and I know a lot of yous do, then this is a game for you. Also, if you happen to like Yokai, I'm sure you'll dig this too. So yeah, definitely not worth the price it goes for online these days, but if you have the means to give this one a quick whirl and experience the joy of dropping a snowman onto a kappa while banging music plays in the background, trust me, it is one of life's simplest pleasures.
will provide.
Rounding out today's selection, we have The Adventure of Little Ralph, which made it to the PlayStation in June of 1999. This game was chosen for us today by four fine fellows, them being Gordon Shumway, StepMac35, Jose A. Diaz, and now two-time winner, High Retro Game Lord. And look, usually when a game is chosen by this many people, you can tell we're probably in for a banger, and in the case of Little Ralph, let me tell you, this is most certainly a banger. So full disclosure, I have played and beaten this game many's a time, and I would even go as far as to say that it's one of my all-time favorite PlayStation games. Usually when you start researching into the Japanese side of this console's library, it's not long until you come across The Adventure of Little Ralph, a little 2D side-scrolling action platformer from a developer called New Corporation. A game that's earned quite a reputation for itself over the years, partly because it's one of the most expensive import games you'll find on the console, but more importantly, also because it's very good. Anyway, before we dive into the game, let's briefly talk about New Corporation, a small dev team started in 1991, made up of a group of young and passionate arcade game fans with a love of 80s action platformers in particular, and their debut project, Little Ralph, was initially planned for the Sharp X68000, a very popular computer in Japan at the time. Although, for one reason or another, development of Ralph would take a lot longer than planned. In fact, it wouldn't even be their debut game, with the 1995 PS1 title Boxer's Road being their first release as a studio, and after some mild success with that title and some work porting other games to both the Sharp X68000 and PS1, finally in 1999, their baby Little Ralph would make it onto the PlayStation after 8 years of development, which in those days was a very long time to be making a game. In fact, it took so long when Ralph did appear on the PlayStation, it stuck out like a sore thumb, not because it was a old school 2D game released in '99, which to be honest, didn't really help its cause, but more so because the game was a real throwback gameplay wise, a short, linear, 2-button action platformer. Other than the fact the graphics were clearly PlayStation level 2D, this could have been a game released in the 80s in terms of its design. Well, some of it anyway, but either way, it was rare to see a game in this time period so clearly aimed at invoking the past, when almost every other big hit at the time was looking into the future. And you know, oddly, this is what makes Ralph one of the console's best games in my opinion, because I can't really think of any other 2D platformer that does everything as well as Ralph does. Despite its short length, it is literally all killer, no filler. Every level, every boss, every item, every enemy, all feels meticulously crafted, and on top of that, it's also a dream to control, a title that legitimately feels like it had 8 years worth of thought and care put into it. But anyway, that's the gist of things. What is this little game about a guy stabbing mummies all about? Now, luckily this game has always been very easy to play with no Japanese knowledge, but even more lucky for us, Ralph did receive an English fan translation this very year, courtesy of the lovely Xander3312. So now we can understand the story and why lots of people are naked for some reason. It mostly boils down to Ralph's girlfriend being kidnapped by a bunch of demons because she has ancient magical powers, and then you get turned into a kid and have a talking sword. You know, the usual stuff. That doesn't really explain why they love showing off butts in this game, but hey, who am I to deny people's artistic talents? From here, it's time for little boy Ralph to set off across 8 levels and rescue his gal. It's pretty much all it needs to be story-wise, but there is some legitimately fun banter between Ralph and the enemies you'll face, enough so that I would recommend going out of your way to get the translation if you can. But regardless, once you get into the game, it's about as old school as it gets. You've got 2 buttons, one to make Ralph jump, and another to use his sword. Beyond that, you've also got access to a duck and duck attack, and also a cool downward stab that does triple damage, and most importantly, a charge attack that lets you use your sword kind of like a baseball bat to shoot back projectiles and also shoot smaller enemies like a projectile, which is not only good for killing enemies, but also chaining kills for big points and even solving puzzles on occasion. And while everybody loves points, it's also one of the main ways you'll earn lives in this game, the others being, well, you know, picking up lives and also little hearts, which if you get enough of, will give you an extra life. So you're going to want to utilize this charge mechanic whenever possible, not just for the good of the leaderboard, but also for finishing the game, which can be pretty tough at times. Another way to earn points is items, of course, most of which are fruit and some of which are not fruit, including a cool little sharp 68,000 here, a nice little nod to the game's development. One of the things I love most about this game is how it uses items to lure you into interesting situations, because on occasion, fruit will spawn, and you only have a small window of time to collect it all. The more you collect, the bigger your points bonus gets, and every single level is packed full of this stuff, and doing these segments well is incredibly satisfying to pull off. It almost feels parkour-like in its execution, and many of these parts require quick decision making and perfect timing to nail, and if this game's controls weren't up to snuff, they could potentially be quite frustrating, but they are so good and precise. Every time you see a piece of fruit appear in a row like this, you're like, oh shit, let's fucking go. And when you nail a real tough section or find some cool secret path that you've never stumbled across before, it is just so satisfying. Now, in terms of power-ups, we've got 2 sword pickups, one which extends your basic sword's reach, and another that shoots out a little fireball projectile. Both very useful, and both can also be equipped at the same time. Although my favorite power-up has to be this little white furry guy who follows you around and shoots an arc projectile. If you manage to get all of your power-ups together, you can turn Ralph into a little walking death machine, which is really quite lovely to witness. That being said though, while Ralph can certainly dish out the damage, like most children, he is very squishy, enough so that on normal difficulty, it takes a single hit to wipe Ralph out, and if you die, you of course lose all your power-ups. Luckily, you can find a shield power-up which gives Ralph 1 free hit before death, but even still, if it's your first time playing, death will likely come quick and fast, but at the very least, it never feels undeserved. And better still, checkpoints are very generous and continues are infinite, so as long as you don't mind gutting your high score, getting back into the game so you can die all over again is a very quick process. Luckily for newcomers and people not used to old school action platformers, the game's easy mode does tone down the difficulty quite a bit and gives Ralph 2 hits before he dies, but as a catch, you can only make it as far as level 5 on this difficulty, so you're going to need to work your way up to normal if you want to see all this game has to offer, and believe me, a lot of its best and most gruesome stuff is saved until last. Anyway, that's the majority of the gameplay in a nutshell, but we do have one more thing to talk about gameplay wise, and that's the bosses, because while this is a game of many highlights, I think the bosses stand as one of its definite triumphs, because not only are the boss battles variety filled and action packed with plenty of little gimmicks and fun patterns to explore, about halfway into the game, Ralph drops its biggest surprise, where during one of the boss fights, your sword temporarily turns you back into an adult, and the game suddenly becomes a 1v1 2D fighter. And guys, let me tell you, not only is this really cool, but this right here is legitimately a good fighting game. It's pretty simple with only a light and heavy attack, but you've got loads of special moves, the gameplay is fast and fluid, and there's like 4 different fights in this whole game, and they are legitimately some of the best parts of the entire game. I mean, on one hand, if you're good at action platformers and bad at fighting games, you're probably going to have a bad time once these guys come in and start knocking the shit out of you. But if you happen to be really good at action platformers and also Street Fighter 2, this right here is the coolest shit ever. Like, somehow, in spite of this episode also featuring a dedicated fighting game, Little Ralph is the best fighting game featured in this episode. Also, the last boss is fought in this style, and it's such an intense battle. It's peak sweaty gamer mode whenever this lad comes out, and even if you lose to him, he beats you with such style, you can't be too mad about it. Well, you can actually, he's really fucking hard. I legitimately don't think I have a negative thing to say about this game. I mean, it's a bit short, I guess, but I've played through it at least 10 times now, and while that isn't a lot, it's one of those titles that I like a little more each time I do it. I mean, we're only talking about an hour to beat this thing, assuming you don't die, which, as I said before, you definitely will a few times when you first play it, but it's such an enjoyable and expertly crafted video game. Like, you can feel the passion and love that went into this thing, that you can't really help but see it to the end. And once you get hit by the ending, it's hard not to want to start it up and do it all over again. Although, in saying that, once you do beat the game, you unlock a fighting mode with access to all the boss characters and multiple color sets for each. And some of these lads have crazy movesets, so you're probably going to get stuck dicking about with that for a bit. Seriously, what is going on with this lad? So yeah, gameplay wise, for what it is and what it aims to be, I'd consider this a legit 10 out of 10 all-timer platformer. It takes all the right lessons from older classics of the genre and still manages to add its own spin to things. And while at its core the game is undeniably simple, it's the level of polish and thought around this simplicity that I think elevates Ralph to classic status. It's a legitimate masterclass in 2D gaming, and above all else, just an absolute joy to play. Like, I swear, if this were a Mega Drive or Super Nintendo game, or even on a console with a bigger spotlight on its Japanese and 2D library like the Saturn, this is a game people wouldn't shut up about. It's really that good. And that's before we even talk about the presentation, which, while not really pushing the boundaries in a visual sense, it's impossible to deny the quality of the 2D visuals on display. It kind of reminds me of games like Neketsu Oyaku, where you can see a definite bump in quality from older console hardware, but the game still retains that sort of classic 2D look. Like, if you could imagine what next-gen 2D would look like in the early 90s, this is kind of what you'd envision, right? Levels have a lot of variety and personality, as do the enemies and bosses, especially when you enter into the fighting segments, as these backgrounds and chunky sprites just look fantastic. You don't feel like it's pushing the hardware exactly, but it's definitely a step beyond what you'd be used to on your 16-bit consoles. I also have to give a special mention to the game's sound effects and soundtrack, which is a banger the entire way through, from the upbeat tunes of the early levels to the intense and sometimes ominous tracks that appear later in the game. There is not a bad track to be found in this thing, and if you like your sound effects sound effecty, this game sure does like to let you know when things are going well or poorly, or a mixture of both. Either way, there will be some fun sounds playing, that's for sure. And while the base soundtrack is certainly good, New Corp obviously couldn't stop there and lets you change all of the music to a PSG mode so you can experience what this game would have sounded like had it actually made it out onto the Sharp X 68000, and in some ways it fits the game even better than the original soundtrack. It really is some lovely stuff and a very nice addition. So yeah, that was the adventure of Little Ralph, one of my absolute favorite PlayStation games, and if you've yet to go play it, definitely go out of your way to do so. It's perfect if you've got an hour to kill, it's perfect if you're looking for a fun pick up and play game for your little emulation handheld, it's perfect if you're looking for a challenging point score or speedrun game. In fact, if you just like well-made throwback platformers that have been made with love and passion, it's simply perfect. In many ways, it feels like a precursor to all those banging indie throwbacks that we see nowadays. Just a small dev team making a passion project for the love of it above all else. Did this game sell well? Of course not, but time has been good to it. If you give it some of your time, it'll be good to you too, I can promise you that. Also, it has incredibly detailed pixelated butts, and that stuff takes talent, so you gotta give them points for that. While it is ludicrously expensive to buy physically, it is available as a much more affordable PS3 download, and also for free if you know where to look. Guys, there's this thing called the internet, and you won't believe what they have on here. Free PlayStation games, vouchers for fucking Burger King. The possibilities are endless. But anyway, while I continue to dig into the wonders of the internet, everybody else out there should be playing The Adventure of Little Ralph. I mean, come on, he's got a little fluffy animal friend thing. Everybody loves those. Well, there you have it, yet another really good selection of games. Well, one really good game and two less good but really interesting games, and I'll take a really good and really interesting one over a really bad one. And I really gotta stop saying really, it's really getting out of hand. We got to check out a bizarre Japanese interpretation of The Wizard of Oz that shows the potential of Tin Man being a character in Jet Set Radio, a yokai fighting game with banging music, and also a bird that can do ultra combos, and a lovely 2D platformer about the joy of being turned into a little guy and fucking shit up with your magic sword, something I'm sure we can all relate to. So how do these games stack up on the almighty arbitrary ranking system? Are today's games must-plays, worth trying if you like the look of them, maybe just kinda meh? Are they complete trash and not worth your time? Or did I find any of them unplayable due to the language barrier? Well, Volume 17 selection sees Yellow Brick Road making it into No Gaijin tier, Yokai Butouden making it into Met tier, and unsurprisingly we have our final game, The Adventure of Little Ralph, becoming another jewel in the must-play crown. You love to see it. Now, I'll be honest with you, when it comes to Yellow Brick Road, there's a strong case to make for putting this game in trash tier. It's very simple, it's very light on content, and in spite of not being able to understand the plot and dialogue sequences, I could finish the game no problem. However, without really being able to judge an adventure game on its dialogue or characters, I can't really say that I've given this game a fair shake. I mean, come on, what's the point of giving a score to an adventure game if I can't accurately describe the adventure. As for the gameplay parts, even though I see the potential in the battle system, the complete lack of additional role-playing elements and, the lack of battles in general, make this a game I can't really recommend, even though I do enjoy how bizarre it often is. That being said though, the first game does have an English release on Windows and Mac, and if the trilogy ever happens to receive a full translation, it's something I'd be interested in revisiting again, because for all its faults, it is an interesting little game at the very least, and hey, if you happen to be a family or girl, you may still get a kick out of this thing. As for Mizuki Shigeru no Yokai Butouden, this is undoubtedly a broken, janky, content life fighting game that's almost entirely bolstered by its yokai cast and banging soundtrack. It's far more playable than some of the really rough fighters on the platform, and it does have some cool gimmicks to spice things up, but nothing here that is really unique to this title, and also hasn't been done much better in countless other fighters. That being said, if you like your fighters obscure, spooky, and a little rough around the edges, which, if I know the fighting game community, a lot of you do, there's still some fun to be had from this game, and I won't lie, there is an endearing quality to it that I quite enjoyed. Maybe it's being able to delete 80% of somebody's health bar in one move, maybe it's being able to drop a snowman on a demon's head. Who can say, but either way, you can certainly do much better than this thing. And last but not least, we have The Adventure of Little Ralph, and I'll say it before, and I'll say it again. One of the absolute best 2D experiences you will find on the PlayStation. It knocks it out of the park in the visual and audio department, but where this game really shines is its buttery smooth controls and excellent design. From its mechanics to its level layouts, it is a finely crafted piece of pixelated perfection, and a game that I can return to almost endlessly and find new things to appreciate about it, and in this case the English fan patch certainly gave me a lot more to appreciate. Once again, this isn't necessarily a game that reinvents the wheel or pushes boundaries, but there are plenty of other games in the PlayStation that can fill that void. For those simply looking for a pretty and polished take on a classic, no other game is doing it on the PlayStation quite like Ralph. And if I were to recommend just a handful of Japan-only titles to check out, Ralph is always gonna get a nod from me. So if you're thinking of trying it, absolutely go out of your way to do so. It is an absolute banger. Anyway, that's the episode, and as always, I'd like to give a huge congrats to today's chosen for their contribution. So give it up for our game for Yellow Brick Road, Galaxy Express 999 for Mizuki Shigeru no Yokai Butouden, and the Fab 4 of Gordon Shumway, Step Mac 35, Jose A. Diaz, and Hi Retro Game Lord for The Adventure of Little Ralph. Appreciate your suggestions as always, and I hope you've enjoyed the episode. And of course, I gotta give a big shout out to my lovely Patreon supporters for helping make videos like this possible, including fine folks like Alan Castellan, Alias McDough, Alan Barry, an L with Knees, Bleeding Cart, Brendan Hess, Brian, Casey Wagner, Clumbums, Danny, Dave Nolan, Disc Kun, the mascot for the Famicom Disk System, Doma, Earl Grey III, Etchy Gamer, Fergal O'Hagan, Fragile Traveller, Gigazol, Icelide, Eero Forte, Jacob Althouse, Jared Bynum, Johnbo81, JR Hurd, Jude, Karuran, Kyle Winter, Life Sword, Lurkish Delight, Mr. Papala, Mikael, Moomin Biscuit, Trans Rights Are Human Rights, Mr. the Joshmon, My Pal Robot, Nathan McMullen, Nick Norman, Pika Foop, Richard Kramer, SN Kierstead, Cyeno, Sean Slater, Spectre117, the friendly Chocoball Bird, Kiyoro-chan, Tolkoto, Will Savoy, and Zark, who have all subscribed at the Fan++ tier. And last but not least, a big thank you to you at home or wherever you are for watching the video. I sure do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, why not leave a like, a comment, or maybe even subscribe to the channel so you can keep up with my incredibly irregular video release schedule, which at this point is mostly vibes based, but you can rest assured I'll be back once again with some more PlayStation goodness when the time is right, which, considering it's nearly the end of the year, should be sooner rather than later. Those fan translations are going to talk about themselves, so until then, look after yourselves, be good to one another, and I'll talk to you again real soon. See ya!